author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Author Kurt Vonnegut once asked, who is to be pitied, a writer bound and gagged by policemen, or one living in perfect freedom who has nothing more to say? Now, that's an interesting question. It's one that we might just examine today on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's edition, we talk the rise of Ron DeSantis, the fall of Lori Lightfoot, free speech under attack once again, and how the next generation is tending towards authoritarianism. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Hastings, Michigan on WBCH 1220 AM and 93.1 FM. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has stripped Disney of its special status, a move that some say is long overdue and others say is authoritarian. Either way, the move is certain to be political. We're very lucky to be joined by Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Lisa K. Donner, to get to the heart of the Sunshine State's Top Gun maneuvers. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm all right, and I believe at time of recording, the Sunshine State is suffering a real pea super.
Well, I happen to be in the Sunshine State, and it actually burned off, and now it is another beautiful sunny day. But wait 5 minutes, that just might change. That's what we say about England. If you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. So, Lisa, let's start with a very deceptively simple question, if we may. If Ron DeSantis were not the governor of Florida, would the world know or even be concerned with the Magic Kingdom's special status? Well, I don't know, maybe not. He has definitely put himself front and center of this culture war, and I think it is a culture war. And remember, if your side is on the side of culture, you're going to next take over the politics. So culture is very important. Yeah, it really is true that politics is downstream from culture. Now, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but it seems to me that these actions of stripping Disney of the benefits it has, specifically with the Reedy Creek land, are the actions of someone who's determined to build national recognition. What's your take? Well, that's interesting. I suppose you're right. I guess I see DeSantis more as a purist in this area. I mean, he has small kids. Some of the stuff that's been going on in Disney has really been upsetting parents. I don't think it's so much that DeSantis is the authoritarian here, is that Disney has become the authoritarian. For instance, they're doing a special gig with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. And the Gay Men's Chorus published a video in 2021 informing viewers that, quote, "we will convert your children quietly and subtly to LGBT ideology," and, quote, "you will barely notice it." I mean, that, for something that's designed to be family fun, the very idea that any group with any ideology at all, regardless of whether it's the LGBT ideology or any other ideology, that they would aim to surreptitiously convert your children to any cause whatsoever, and the parents not being able to notice it. I mean, that's a problem for any ideology, isn't it? And yet Disney appears to have jumped wholeheartedly into bed with this particular group. Well, again, I'm not sure that it's an appropriate topic for a children's entertainment company. Yeah, I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? And DeSantis has really gotten the better of them. I mean, he's punishing them big time. The Reedy Creek thing is gone. Their tax-exempt status is gone. He's now appointed the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, and he gets to handpick them. And guess who he's picked? Who's he picked? Bridget Ziegler, a proponent of his education policies, Ron Perry, who heads the Christian Ministry Gathering USA, Michael Sasso, president of the Federalist Society's Orlando chapter, and on and on. He's really won this battle big time.
And how do Floridians feel about that? How do they feel about Disney losing these perks that it had to operate? Because I think it's highly unlikely that Disney will say, well, we're not going to stay in Florida anymore because, Florida's Florida, right? That's where its reputation was built. So how do Floridians feel about what he's done?
I mean, all you have to do is look at the last election.
Yeah.
Governor Ron DeSantis is exceedingly popular in the Sunshine State. I mean, that doesn't mean everybody's for him, but he's exceedingly popular. He had the biggest win of all in November. And so he's pushing forward with a lot of people behind him. And, Florida's an older state. A few more conservative, I think, values are popping up, especially when it comes to this kind of culture and pushing sexuality on small children.
Well, let's talk about this culture war as it is, as you term it. It really does seem to me that even if it weren't happening, as Barack Obama suggested, there's no such thing as the culture war. The mainstream media, let's call it the legacy media or the activist media, for that's what it really is. It is trying to create it. I mean, it was the activist media that ran with, this is the Don't Say Gay bill, even though the words "don't say gay" were never in the bill. And it was across the headlines. And people are using that same term to describe DeSantis policies still today, months after it's been debunked.
Look, my reading on this is that it's not that people are against other people's sexual preferences. It's that they don't want those other folks' sexual preferences put upon their children. They feel like they are the parent and they want to instruct the child in their values. And, that's the traditional look at parenthood. That's a view of parenthood, I should say.
I mean, the idea that the parents shouldn't be in control of educating their children with values that they share. I mean, that really gets to the heart of the idea. And I can't help thinking back to the old Marxist philosophy of, you've got to separate the child from the family so they can become a good communist. I mean, maybe I'm going a little too overboard in that, but this is what it seems like to me. Anything, and the LGBTQ stuff, or anything that tries to separate the children's morality from the parents and the parents' values that they wish to instill in their child, that smacks of communism, doesn't it? Or am I going too far with this?
No, I think there is some element of that in it, Mark. Traditionally, parents have had the opportunity, the right, and frankly, the responsibility to school their kids in their values. So let's say you grow up in a Christian home, you take your kid to Sunday school, you bring them up in your Christian values. Let's say you are an Orthodox Jewish person. You take your child to temple, maybe to Hebrew school, that sort of thing. So, this is that, to me, that's the ultimate melting pot. I mean, where people get an opportunity to intersect with others that are brought up in a way that is traditional to their family.
It strikes me as funny that nobody on and let's be fair, most of this is coming from the political left, that nobody on the political left is saying that we should stop Muslim children from going to mosques because there's a dangerous inculcation of their parents' beliefs, and it's brainwashing them into their parents' beliefs, where they're quite happy to say that about Christians. Yeah,
I do want to bring up that Christians and traditional family values have been bolstered by the Muslim community.
Very much so.
Michigan, they're not the Muslim community is not hep to all this, indoctrinating your child at a young age.
Yeah, it seems like there's an immovable object and an irresistible force about to approach when it comes to the ideology that's being pushed on children through these woke corporations. Lisa, final word for you. Does what DeSantis has done in Florida bolster his potential presidential hopes?
In a nutshell, Mark, yes.
And there you have it. We'll be back with Lisa K. Donner after this short break, talking Lori Lightfoot. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're back with Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Lisa K. Donner. Earlier in the show, we tackled a politician on the rise, but now let's look the opposite direction, to a Chicago leader on her way out. The almost unthinkable happened in the Windy City with Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who will be out on her ear come April, as we say on this side of the Atlantic. Lisa, thanks for being back with us. And what happened to this darling of the left?
Well, not a lot of violins are playing over on the right, but I will say that, we don't necessarily know if choices 2, 3, and 4 are a whole lot better. But as for Lori Lightfoot, I think she just went down with the crime rates. They recorded 695 murders in 2022, 804 in 2021. It's bad stuff going on in Chicago.
Yeah, and Jussie Smollett, he got attacked in Chicago too, right?
Don't start now.
Oh.
I don't know if the listener can sense your sarcasm.
So, she was fairly gracious in defeat, I think, to start with. But then she went off on a little bit of a tangent and spoiled it all by blaming her loss on racism. Now, I have a quote for you, and I think I have this right. She says that the reason she didn't advance to the April runoff, she came third, obviously, is because, here's the quote, "I'm a black woman in America, of course." Now, Lisa, my question for you, what was she in 2019 when she won?
Yeah, the door swings both ways, and the electorate can be fickle. And I'm not sure she was voted in because she was a black woman, and I'm not sure she was voted out because she's a black woman.
Yeah, did the people who voted for a black woman in America, of course, in 2019, did they all up and leave Chicago and move to Florida?
Yeah, I just think that her record was what did her in. And sometimes it's hard to look at that in defeat, to take responsibility for the fact that your actions have cost you an election, or maybe in her case, her non-actions. I don't know.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that you bring up the word responsibility, because to me, it seems that's what she was avoiding through most of her 4 years in office. Obviously, she took the job in Chicago, and we know Chicago has been a problem city for a good long time, since Mayor Daley and before. But she refused to accept that she had in her power through policies ways to either ameliorate the issues at hand or to, in some cases, even help. But no, she opted for the opposite. She was fully behind the defund the police movement when crime was running rampant. And I think that there's not really any way that she can look back on her record and say, you know what, I did something good for this city. What do you think?
And I do think it goes beyond identity politics. I think the American electorate doesn't care about somebody's skin color, doesn't care about whether they're a gay woman. I think they care about whether they can get to the grocery store and back without getting shot. I think they care about their daughter who works in a retail store. Is she going to get shot because she's just working in a downtown retail store? I think they're worried about their sons walking the streets and getting shot. Chicago has gotten to be a very, very violent place again.
It really has. Now, obviously, Mayor Lightfoot, she's not advanced to the April 4th runoff, but the two gentlemen that have, both obviously still Democrats. It's Chicago. What else is it going to be?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got Paul Vallis and you've got Brandon Johnson.
Now, the former there, he has a very strong, at least openly strong attitude, positive attitude towards policing. And he hasn't been behind the defund the police movement. He has the support of, I believe, the local police there. Whereas the second candidate, I think I have his day one policy correct here. He is going to promote 200 officers to detective status, but not increase the number of police and perhaps even cut the number of police.
So just to be clear for our listeners, first in line was Paul Vallis. I don't know if you pronounce it Vallis or Vias. He's the one that the Fraternal Order of Police, and that's the big police union, endorsed. Second in line, I keep wanting to say third, second in line is Brandon Johnson. He's the one who says he's expanding the number of detectives by promoting 200 officers, police officers.
And do you think, regardless of which one gets in, do you think it will be business as usual in Chicago?
Well, that's really the $64,000 question, as they say. It's still all one party rule there. And I hate to say yes, because you look at Eric Adams in New York. He was going to be kind of the alternative. And it doesn't look so much like that's happening. Yeah, I'm not an expert on New York, but...
I think that's a very keen distinction to make, because in the run-up to the election for New York mayor, Eric Adams trod very hard. He pushed very hard his associations with the police force, former police officer, and his tough-on-crime attitude. And a lot of people believed that at the time. A lot of people, including me, I actually fell for it, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a good thing for New York, because it's a Democrat that's tough on crime. Well, that's a good mix, right? I mean, it's really showing that Democrats can try and be tough on crime. So it's not just a one-party issue. But then we look at it a little while down the line, and it's pretty much business as usual. Things aren't getting any better. And I wonder if what we see built up from these politicians is not really their actual attitudes or their beliefs on things, but more a carefully crafted veneer that will help them get elected in places that are struggling with genuine issues, but B, something that the media can sell to the public. It's a prepackaged clone of the individual that can be sold to the public.
Well, look, this is what happened in Pennsylvania with the Senate race. I mean, John Fetterman was put in office even though he had serious, and still has, health issues, mental health issues, physical health issues. But, he won the senatorial race, and that spoke volumes. So I think sometimes we become so divisive that we're not looking at people. We're just looking at platform. If you've got a blue D next to your name, I'm going to vote for you, or I'm not going to vote for you, that kind of thing.
As you know, Lisa, any letters after the name nowadays, LGBTQ, D, R, anyone you like, it all makes a difference in American politics. Thanks for joining us, Lisa.
Thank you, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With Dilbert creator Scott Adams throwing his career on the proverbial bonfire of the vanities, we're asking what are the facts behind the flames, and whether public pronouncements in general have become dangerous territory. Well, to help us navigate the complexities, we're joined by Liberty Nation author and host of the Right On Show, Mr. Jeff Charles. Welcome back to the show, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. This should be pretty interesting.
Well, let's hope so. If it isn't, I blame you. If it is, I blame my excellent skills as host. So bear that in mind. Now, Jeff, give us a brief encapsulation of the mess that Scott Adams finds himself in, for those who haven't been subject to the wall-to-wall media spread on this.
Yeah, so it all started with a poll, a Rasmussen poll, that said that it asked respondents if they agreed with the statement, "It's okay to be white." And when they polled Black respondents, 53% agreed with that statement, while 47% were either not sure or they disagreed with the statement. So Scott Adams, who likes to stir the pot, got on his podcast and quoted the poll and basically said that this indicates that Black Americans are a hate group and that he doesn't want to be part of a hate group, and that while he has spent a lot of his lifetime trying to help Black people, he's no longer going to do it because it's futile, it's useless, blah, blah, blah. It went from there, and the internet exploded like Chernobyl. Now, I will say this, and I know you'll have other questions, but sure. I've been listening to Scott Adams for a long time. So when I first saw that rant, I knew what he was doing. But the problem is that not everybody listens to Scott Adams. So this really blew up.
So what was he doing, in your opinion, Jeff? Was he looking for early retirement?
Well, actually, he was, but he didn't talk about that until later during an interview with Hotep Jesus. But he was being provocative. He was using hyperbole to make a point because he wanted to start a conversation. He trolls a lot. He's done this before, although this would be the strongest example of him doing this. And so he wanted to start a conversation, which he did, but I'm not sure if it's centering on what he actually would have wanted people to be talking about.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt he is a provocateur, as is Hotep Jesus, I might add. I'm sure. I think you know him, and let him know he does have a fan over here. Now, you wrote a piece on Liberty Nation. I think it's called Dilbert creator Scott Adams Sets the Internet on Fire. And I got to tell you, it also that article kind of set on fire in terms of the numbers that it gained. It seems to be a popular story across vast swaths of even before unreached audiences. Now, why do you think it gained so much traction?
You know, I think part of it was people wanting to understand what Scott Adams was doing. I mean, some people just dismiss it as racist, but again, I hate to say it, but racism sells. If people think that something's racist, it's going to go viral on social media. I mean, and also Scott Adams is pretty well known. I mean, not everybody listens to his podcast, but they have an idea of who he is. Everybody knows what Dilbert is, right? I mean, even when we were kids, Dilbert was around. So I think that's a lot of it. And I think people had questions about the Rasmussen poll. I think people are rightly questioning the veracity of the poll. I mean, the way the numbers break down, it seems a little hinky.
Yeah, let's talk about that poll very quickly. Now, you and I, we both do a lot of work on digging into the crosstabs and digging into the methodologies on polling. We have to, we follow politics like hawks hunting rabbits. And with this one, I think, so it was 1,000 people, and to be representative of the ethnic makeup of America, they went for 130 Black respondents. That's about right, is it?
Yes. So they polled a little over 1,000 people, 13% of which were Black, which adds up to a grand total of about 130 Black people or so. Although I did see a video with the guy from Rasmussen, Mark, same name as you, who was actually defending the poll and saying that they actually interviewed about, I think, 117. So it's around there. But that basically means that if you do 47% of that, you've got 61 Black people saying that either they're not sure whether it's okay to be white or disagreeing with the statement, which it's hard for me to...
It's not representative of an entire group of... Well, I don't know how many, 13... How many people? I don't know. It's 40 million people, I guess. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that Rasmussen has done some amazing polling, but I think the issue here... is that you're looking at something about an attitude rather than a decision, and an attitude is far more nuanced than I'm going to vote for this person or I'm going to go for that person. That's a very, and I hate to use the word, that's a very binary choice. And attitude surveys are non-binary, right? So they or them are a little bit more difficult to actually get proper data from. I mean, that's my take on it. What's yours?
Yeah, and the thing is, and I understand kind of how statistics work. You get like a representative sample. That's kind of how they do it in general. So I understand that. But again, it's still hard for me to believe that these people represent most Black people. But the other issue too, Mark, is the question itself, right? The phrase "it's okay to be white" originated with the alt-right on 4chan, and it was more of a racist, white supremacist trolling campaign. And the thing is that now that doesn't mean that anybody who's saying it's okay to be white now is a racist or alt-right. A lot of people say it because they're pushing back against a lot of the anti-white sentiment coming from the left. But regardless of that, that is the origin of the phrase. A lot of Black people know that. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but a lot of Black people do know that. And so if that's what was in their heads when they were answering these questions, that could have also skewed the results. So I think that there are a lot of problems with the poll. But like you said, it's really hard to quantify this thing because, I mean, I would say in general, I mean, I've been Black all of my life, except for like the past 2 or 3 years because I didn't vote for Biden. But I've known a lot of Black people, and I have met Black people who just don't like white people. I've met racist Black people. It's true. But the vast majority aren't really even thinking about white people like that. They're fine with white people being white. I mean, everybody has the right to exist, right? So so I know that's anecdotal, but at the same time, it's hard to really answer that question or in a way that makes sense and represents the majority of the people.
You know, I was thinking about getting the comedian Steve Martin on this show because, as you may know, he was raised a poor Black child, and he might have a unique perspective on this. And now, Jeff, I can't let you go without talking about your new book, Chasing Liberty. What is it about, and when does it come out?
Yeah, so it comes out on the 21st. I'm very excited about it. Of March, yes. Okay. And I'm sorry, it comes out on the 13th, Monday the 13th of March. Very excited about it. And basically the book does two things. It tells my story of transitioning from the world of partisan politics to focusing primarily on liberty, promoting liberty, especially at the local level, getting people to focus more on their local politics to push back against the excesses of the federal and state governments. I tell my story about how I came to that decision, but it's also really to help people understand the situation that Americans are in right now with both parties growing the government, making it more intrusive. Also for people who think that they don't have a voice, because if you're a Republican, the establishment is still holding sway. Democrats, same thing. So I want to give some practical reasons and practical tips for getting involved at your local level, because that's the politics that affects you the most.
Okay, and tell us why you think this book is important now.
So I think it's important now because I think we're at a time, Mark, where pretty much everybody is dissatisfied with their political party.
I think that's an understatement.
I think so too, yes. And I've always been liberty focused. I've always been more libertarian leaning, even though I was in the more of the conservative world. But especially after these past midterm elections, and I'm speaking to Republicans specifically, when they saw that red wave didn't materialize, and when they saw that the party basically put the exact same leaders back in charge, I think that really disillusioned a lot of people. But it's not like they're going to go vote Democrat. And for Democrats, the same thing. I mean, because liberty has a lot in line with Democrats that Republicans miss. So I think that when we focus on the concept of liberty itself, rather than team red and team blue, then we can actually make more of a difference. One of the main points that I make in the book is that this really isn't about left or right, Republican or Democrat. This battle is between liberty and authoritarianism. And I really do think that that's the situation that we're in right now, regardless of party. So I think that using local politics as a bulwark against a lot of the excesses that are happening, this has to be a grassroots movement that builds from the bottom to protect the people. But at that point, then you can start bubbling up to state and federal governments.
Jeff, I'm looking forward to reading it. Thanks ever so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We dismiss history at our peril. Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're all familiar with the growing censorship from without, but also there's a fast rising trend of self-censorship whereby regular people are afraid to utter their own thoughts for fear of backlash. It's rampant in the private sector, but becoming even more so in academia. What's the end game, and where does this leave us as a society? Well, we're very fortunate to be joined by constitutional attorney, dapper man about town, legal affairs editor, and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, which I recommend everybody go and listen to, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire, to try and figure all this out. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Cheers, Mark.
So, Scott, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, they conducted a survey examining, I guess, attitudes across academia. What did it find?
A number of things, all sort of disturbing developments on the free speech front, namely that, as we might expect, given our regular viewing of news stories as they come across the transom, that the younger professors are much more hostile to notions of free speech, much less likely to support free speech, and much more likely to countenance impositions on free speech than their older colleagues. And of course, the future is where the youth is, and so that's what's so troubling about the findings.
So with these findings, I mean, it seems, as you say, that there's definitely a generational difference there. The younger ones are.
Let me give you one statistic just to kind of throw out there. Over 2/3 of the professors in their 50s and older said that it was never acceptable to shout down, to successfully shout down a speaker, the classic heckler's veto, Mark. But only 1/3 of those under 35 felt the same way. They were willing to grant over 2/3 were willing to say that a heckler's veto was okay. It is the classic denial of free speech on the college campus, and I think it starkly illustrates the problem.
Yeah, that I think that age differential is really important, because obviously you have two reasons. One, the older professors are raised in a different generation where this really wasn't acceptable. You know, the ideas of free speech, especially on a college campus, were thought to be inviolate when many of these people may have gone to college, so even 30 to 40 years ago. But also
longer than that, and many of them came about during the time when the free speech movement was afoot, which was actually about free speech on campus in the face of conservative, largely, but in any case, sort of writ large establishment censorship against alternative speech.
Absolutely, which brings to the second point. So these older professors, they're older. They don't have a career to try and save. So really, the younger ones, they're fearful. And I think that's a very sad place to be. They're fearful about, what am I going to do for the next 40, 50 years if I get cancelled? And it seems that these young professors, they're worried about making some kind of mistake. I think it's 40% are worried about making a mistake that will cost them their career. Now, when they say
that's 40% of the liberals self-identified in the survey, Mark. So you can only imagine, for those who don't identify as liberal, what that number must be. Closer to 100 than the 0, I would imagine.
I would very much agree with that. So you've got these professors, and they're scared. When they say making a mistake, they don't mean that, I accidentally said that pi to 9 digits instead of 10 digits, and I got the 10th digit wrong. Right. What they're talking about is something that will offend the children. That's what they're talking about when they say a mistake. They mean something that will offend somebody within their class. Or, let's be fair, this can be somebody not even in their class, as we have seen.
A Twitter mob need not occur. Justin Peterson is famously being
Jordan.
What did I say? Justin? I think maybe Justin Trudeau. There was a portmanteau of that. Sorry about that to both gentlemen. No offense intended. Jordan Peterson is famously being either prosecuted or persecuted, as you might say, by I think it's the Ontario College of Psychologists, or if that's not exactly it.
It's the governing body of psychologists.
And for a number of complaints about his clinical psychology practice, and none of the complaints are by a patient of his or by anybody who's even met any patient of his. They're all just some rando person on the internet who decided to complain. And of course, they're the people who are motivated to act against him in any case now have, some purchase of a ledge that they think they can, they can hoist his own petard on, basically. But
it's an Orwellian 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon now, or 6 steps from Kevin Bacon. I'm never sure how that works.
True for these professors, as you say, like they could make a comment at an academic conference by answering a question and not properly denouncing something or pronoun, some perceived pronoun violation that we're, hypersensitive to in these days, anything like that.
Let me get back to the question on this, Scott, because so it's the children that the professors are afraid of, because the children are waiting for an opportunity to pounce on them and make them pay for an unspecified crime or for having a position of authority that they resent. Now,
I appreciate you calling them children editorially, but let's be clear. We're talking about adults in America.
I was talking about their
university
mental
students.
capacity.
Yeah,
but yes,
that.
they're physically adults. They identify as adults.
By the way, don't make the mistake. It's not about their mental capacity. It's their emotional capacity. That's
absolutely
that's the trouble
correct
here, Mark.
So they've gone full authoritarian, haven't they? Haven't they become the things which they protest against?
Well, they don't protest against authority. Well, yeah, I guess if they're still using those talking points, but now it's mostly about, hate speech is to be railed upon rather than free speech to be embraced, and this is the natural consequence of it. The sad thing is that, do we see these younger professors maturing into robust defenders of free speech? Without the proper foundation to respect it, you wonder how they're going to, get that seeped into their pores.
Well, here's let me take this idea and make it even more dystopian for you. You have these young professors who will, if they're watching every single word they say in fear, living their careers in fear, they're going to be broken, elderly professors who may have tenure, but who have lost the passion of life and the spirit of critical thinking and fierce thought, which is a tragedy in itself. But then they'll be teaching a generation of people, a new generation of people, to become professors. And imagine what state those are going to be in. I'm always reminded of the idea that you see a young single mother perhaps wandering around with the child, and the child's like 2 years old and it's got pierced ears and whatnot already, and the mother's got the tattoos and the pierced ears. The child at 2 years old has got the pierced ears. What's that child's child going to be like? How far down the rabbit hole does this go?
Face tattoos are the only thing that spring to mind.
I live in the north of England. They're very common.
I would say that what you've laid out is certainly a troubling and dystopian vision of the future. I would say take succor in the notion that our universities will be defunct by then, that the corruption and rot is so through and through, that the value proposition that they offer is so poor that increasingly people are choosing to stay away from them. And given the technological access to...
That doesn't matter if the value proposition is so poor when you have the government seemingly willing to bail you out for the costs along the line.
Even that is a sucker's deal. They act like they're giving these bailouts, and meanwhile, the average cost of a 4-year education, it's like 10%, like something like that is the bailout amount. It's so even the socialism they're not getting right. It's like the imposition of Obamacare. It's, a very expensive insurance policy that doesn't cover much. At least the European socialists seem to be able to deliver some services with their
they absolutely do. And as long as you don't mind waiting a year and a half for it, right, you're going to get it just right. Scott DeCosenza, thanks ever so much for talking with us on this particular topic. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Mark.
And that about wraps it up for this week on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. My thanks to our guests, Lisa K. Donna, Sarah Cowgill, Jeff Charles, and Scott DeCosenza, and to you at home for taking the time to join us. One final thought to leave you with. Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "People demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use." Now, I have a feeling that if people thought more than they spoke and considered what they had heard more than react with that authoritarian abandon, we might not be in the midst of a war on free speech at all. Just something to consider. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh.
Heard it here first.
Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.